Okay, good evening. Welcome everyone to the screening of this great episode, the Years of Living Dangerously Priceless. My name is Tom Kerr. I manage the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition here at the World Bank Group. I also manage private sector climate policy across the street at the International Finance Corporation. So, carbon pricing. We've been hearing a lot about it, as you just saw in this very good video directed by Kaia here on our panel. It's kind of become a buzzword, as was discussed. The momentum really seems to be picking up. Just some quick statistics from our latest study, the State Trends. There's 60 plus jurisdictions right now that are pricing carbon in some way around the world. There's over 1,200 global businesses that are using an internal carbon price to sort of future-proof their business model, or either they use it now or they're planning to do that the next year. And the NDCs, these plans submitted to Paris by countries for their climate targets, over half of them, over 100 of them indicate they want to use carbon pricing as a key element for their climate strategy. So that's fantastic. What great momentum we're seeing. I think that's why we're seeing this convergence. But I think then on the other side, only about 12% of emissions today are covered by a carbon price around the world. And the average price that we're assessing across the world is a little bit under $10 a ton of CO2. So that's the challenge. We need to increase the coverage of pricing, and we need to sort of deepen or expand the use of pricing. And so that's why we have this carbon pricing coalition at the bank. It's an initiative to try to accelerate carbon pricing by bringing together public and private and civil society actors to really create the space for discussion and to move it forward. And that's been terrific. But carbon pricing is a politically challenging policy. And we need to move beyond. We are definitely going to do the capacity building and the support we need to get these countries and these businesses to move forward. But I think we've also recognized that we need a communication strategy, if you will, to turn this momentum into what you might call a movement. So I think today's panels, before we show the TV show, we're going to talk a bit about what are the different elements of turning this momentum into a movement? How do we pick this up? So my first respondent here to my right is James Close. He's the Director of Climate Change here at the World Bank Group. James, from your perspective, your clients at the bank are finance ministers. How do you see us forming a movement, if you will, amongst finance ministers to support carbon pricing?
Yeah, thank you, Tom, and good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to be here to discuss this extremely important topic. And I think when you asked that question, it just made me reflect a little bit on where we've come from, because I think it was 2.5 years ago, Tom, that you and several other people at the bank had the idea of creating this coalition of people who were prepared to sign on to putting a price on carbon. And I think most people thought you were pretty mad to try and do this. But as I recall, there was something like 70 countries, I think, signed up ahead of Climate Week in New York 2 years ago, and 1,000 businesses. And that, I think, was the beginning of the movement. I think we've taken that on together really to the next level. If I think about the types of conversation we have with finance ministers, they're very much about how we mainstream climate action into fiscal policy, and finance ministers immediately see the importance of getting prices right. And the first part of the conversation is how can you get rid of fossil fuel and energy subsidy reform, and that's a bit of a challenge in its own right for many economies. But the second part of the conversation is very much how do we put a price on carbon, and how do we put a price on carbon that's really meaningful, that's going to change the way investment is made in the economy, and that the choices around investment from both the public sector and the private sector are deployed in the right way. And I think we've, as I say, come a long way, but I think we've got a lot longer to go. I think your two statistics there of 13% of emissions being covered by a price on carbon and an average price of $10 suggests that we really need to be doubling that in both areas in the next 12 to 18 months, and then doubling again shortly thereafter if we're going to get to the kind of prices that will shift the way the economy develops, which there's some studies suggesting you need to be about $100 a tonne to make some of the switches we need to make so that we can actually link this to science-based targets. And I think, how will we know we've been successful? Well, I think we'll see companies not just putting a price on carbon, but linking it to science-based targets. And I think we'll also get a very good sense that policymakers are committed to this. They see the benefits of the uses of this income to deploy in ways that support strained public finances or enable investment in research and development and clean technology. And I think we'll also see carbon markets developing that really enable us to significantly reduce the cost of the implementation of the NDCs. And I think some of the work that you referred to, Tom, suggests that by 2030 we could have reduced the cost of implementing the NDCs by up to 30%, and by 2050 nearly 50% if we create carbon markets that use the price of carbon to enable us to make the best choices for this economic transformation that we need to go to. And just a final point, the urgency of this is enormous. I think yet again today there is data that shows that this month has been the hottest month of the year ever. So it's the hottest November in history. I think that goes on a track record of many, many months where that's been the case. We're seeing the changes in the Arctic ice cap accelerating, so we really need to make these kind of transformational changes to our economy as quickly and effectively as possible, and putting a price on carbon is a necessary but not sufficient means for doing that.
Great, thank you, James. I think that's a really good capture of where we are today with talking to finance ministers and the different key actors. And I like the point about use of revenues. I think I wanted just to reiterate a lot of the discussions I was at in Marrakesh. I did see a shift in the conversation around carbon pricing. It typically is seen as sort of, this is going to be a challenging, it's a tax, it's sort of this negative thing, into it actually generates billions of dollars of revenues. What do we do with that? Well, here's an opportunity. Let's discuss what are the different ways. You said R&D. How do we shift some of the jobs from the fossil industry to clean tech? Things like that. So thanks for that, James. I think the next I wanted to move down to Tom Erb. Tom, you're managing this Put a Price on It campaign. I'd love to hear more about the campaign, who's involved, what are your sort of goals, and where you see this contributing to really creating that political space to advance carbon pricing.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank you for your leadership as well, James, everyone here. It's an honor to be with all of you tonight. A lot of climate leaders out there, and I'm very happy to be here. So he's correct, my name is Tom Erb. I'm 20 years old, a student at Pomona College, and currently the national field organizer for the Put a Price on It campaign. And essentially what I do on a day-to-day basis is recruit, organize, and support students across the country to both organize on the local level, on their campus, and then advocate on the state and federal level for carbon pricing. So a lot of the mechanisms that we talked about earlier. This campaign gave birth out of a collaboration between Years of Living Dangerously, which is the documentary you're about to watch, the episode you're about to see features our campaign, and the national organization known as Our Climate, which is a millennial-led and operated group. I don't know if Camilla Thorndike and Paige Atchison are here yet. They're the two founders of the campaign. They'll be here later. They are very courageous and inspiring leaders, and I recommend you talk to both of them if you get the opportunity. So something to emphasize that you're only going to see a small glimpse of the campaign and the momentum and the movement that's growing across the country in this episode. And that's very important to emphasize. We launched in August, and in that short span of time, we now have 50 campuses that are involved in several states. We have students all across the country that are rallying to the cause and rallying to advocate for carbon pricing, state level, federal level, and everywhere in between. And it's also important to emphasize that now more than ever, there's a true case for optimism. We talk about climate change, we talk about the hottest years on record, we talk about rising sea levels, but we can also talk about solutions and something we can rally behind. And students are optimistic that they can make that happen. And it's also important to emphasize that I'm not here representing myself today. I'm here representing all these students. For example, Savannah is a student in Utah. She's a freshman at the University of Utah, and she is committed to finding a carbon pricing leader on every single campus in her state, and she's close to doing it. Elke is 19 years old. She took a year off before college, and she's found 50 businesses in her congressional district to sign on to climate action. Sam and Kyle are two students at Fordham University in New York City and have launched the carbon pricing campaign there pretty much by themselves. It's for Jen, Alana, Samantha, all of our students across the country that are advocating for price on carbon. Each of them has a vision, and each of them has an inspiring story. So I want to thank all of you guys for coming here tonight. It's an honor to be a part of this campaign, and we're working to advocate basically the youth around this movement. So thank you.
Thank you. No, it's really inspiring to us as well. So you're a leader in your space, and it's terrific to hear all these stories of leadership coming up. And as we just discussed before the session, I'd love to think about how do we connect other universities around the world. You know, this is a really global phenomenon, and we are getting approached by some universities. So let's keep talking about that. Next, I'd like to call on Kaia Rose. You just saw, if you're here early, you saw her film. It was basically, you know, I would maybe, I don't know if you mind, put a price on carbon for dummies. It's a great sort of explanation of what is a carbon price. You know, someone like you can tell your grandma or you know the guy you buy your fish from. You know, this is why carbon pricing is important. What inspired you to do the film, and what's next? Are you thinking of doing other sort of carbon pricing related films?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I was one of those dummies. So it's kind of for me and my group of friends. I'm not from the climate world, so I'm a filmmaker based in New York City, and got inspired when I started hearing about all the climate solutions. And very much like you, I'd heard a lot of doom and gloom, and not nearly enough solutions that got me excited and inspired and made me feel empowered. So I set out on this journey, kind of jumped into this climate world, started this web series called Climate Countdown, that aimed to map out the ecology of climate solutions. And as we were talking to scientists and academics and policymakers and activists, we were hearing about their solutions, but then they would so often say, well, if we put price on carbon, it would make my job a lot easier. And so the more we heard that, the more we started focusing on price on carbon. And it really became, for me, the subject that got me the most excited and most inspired. And I've now joined Citizens Climate Lobby as a volunteer, which I think Tom's involved with as well. And is also coming up in a Years of Living Dangerously episode, I believe. So for me, I came at it from a point where I didn't know what price on carbon was. And once someone explained it to me well, it like clicked, and it just seemed like a no-brainer, and I felt like, well, why aren't we doing this? So my goal with this was to kind of explain it in a really unintimidating, light, just easy, conversational, informal way, mainly to get more young people involved, because I feel like I think you can speak to this as well, that it really resonates with young people. It's about transforming our economy, and our generation is very economically savvy, and I think that they get excited about these macro solutions, and it's kind of that one solution that will elevate everyone else's solutions, which gets me excited, and I think if you can explain it in that way, it makes everyone else get excited as well. So I'm hoping to continue making films about this, and maybe exploring some more kind of emotional ways of how do you reach those people that aren't already engaged, and kind of jump over those barriers that cause reactions into kind of the controversial areas, and just speak to them in a really value-based way. Because I do think that this is something that can speak to everyone if they got it in their own framing. So I'm really interested in continuing to tell the story in different ways. And I'm really pleased to be here alongside all of you, and feeling very inspired. So thank you.
Thank you, Kaia. So yeah, I think it's great to think about, you know, sort of put a price on carbon for what? You know, what do we see? The clean energy, new clean tech jobs. You know, there's so many great stories and elements we could really flesh out. So I look forward to working with you on that. Finally, I'm really honored to have Joe Romm with us. He's the science advisor to the Years of Living Dangerously TV show. He's also been in this space for many years, a real thought leader, both working in government for many years, also the Climate Progress blog, and many of us follow very closely. So Joe, I think we'd like you to sort of set the scene for the episode we're about to see. Tell us a little bit about the Years of Living Dangerously show in general, and maybe if we have a little time after your intervention before we show the film, we can go to Q&A. But please, Joe.
Sure, well, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for showing this. The Years of Living Dangerously you're going to see an episode from season 2. Season 1 was on Showtime. It won the Emmy for Outstanding Nonfiction Series, and it was developed by Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jerry Weintraub and James Cameron, together with former 60 Minutes producers Joel Bach and David Gelber, and really wanted to create not just the first climate change and clean energy series that was ever on TV, but really something quite different, something that combined a 60 Minutes style journalism with movie quality cinematography and using celebrities in a very different way. Rather than having them just sort of talk, they would be the correspondents of a kind that you're used to in 60 Minutes and other shows, and really dig into stories that they became interested in. And it proved very popular, and then in season 2, National Geographic Channel picked this up, so you can watch it. In fact, the next episode will be Wednesday night at 10 o'clock on National Geographic Channel. I think there's 2 more episodes left. It's possible there's 3. And we have just had a variety of different segments. In what you're going to see is 2 segments that form one episode, one of which is Nikki Reed, who is going to do this, learn about the Price on Carbon campaign, put a price on campaign. And the second is Asif Manvi, who you all know probably from when he was on The Daily Show. And he's going to travel around the world looking at the impact of climate change on extinction. And the episode is called Priceless because we don't have a price on carbon, but we're losing all of these priceless species which can't be replaced. And indeed, one of the things that makes climate change unique among moral disasters is that the effects of it are irreversible. And whatever climate change we don't stop as a species, we will be stuck with for about 1,000 years. So that means everything we do now and in the next few years is going to affect the next 50 generations. So it is a big deal. And things that may seem like a small deal now are going to echo through the ages. I think, we tried to get celebrities who were not exactly what you would expect. And, Nikki Reed, as a vampire from the Twilight movies, very accomplished woman. In fact, when she was 14, she co-wrote the screenplay for the movie 13 and starred in the movie 13. So, someone who has been a screenwriter and an actress and an activist, and along with her husband Ian Somerhalder, who just happens to be another vampire, but that's the way things sometimes work. So, and Asif Manvi obviously learned how to be a fake correspondent on The Daily Show, and as you'll see, I think he's really quite good as a regular correspondent too. So, obviously our hope is that, to tell stories in a way that are compelling to people and to use the means of Hollywood and Hollywood storytelling in order to bring it to the largest audience. But the basic story, is one I think everyone in the audience knows well, which is, humans are changing the climate, and we are seriously running out of time to avoid some of the worst irreversible impacts. So, I just, again, it's Wednesday nights at 10 o'clock, and if you get on demand, you can go back and watch all the episodes. I think this is not a show I would recommend binge watching, but every single episode this season is Emmy quality television and is as good as this. And I think, obviously, we need a lot more than one TV series on climate change. We need a whole revolution built around everyone understanding that these individual stories you're going to see are ultimately going to be the stories of all of us.
Great. Well, thank you, Joe. That's really inspiring and exciting. I think, as you said, this has been something you need to tell these stories, and I think this is the way we can communicate in this world we live in these days. You know, we really need to capture people's gut, not their head so much anymore. So I think this is a terrific solution. I believe we do have a bit of time, maybe a few minutes for questions, because we've got a great audience here. I don't know if you want to ask a question, please. I think that they're indicating there's a microphone. You can go up to the microphone. We have a great panel here, so don't be shy. Yeah, please.
Professor Marie-Faye Sager, I'm an international lawyer, senior legal advisor to the presidency of the UN Framework Convention, COP22, and I do a lot of work with a coalition of about 220 law faculties that are working together to change legal education. And one of the reasons I think that young people are getting it so quickly, and there's such a clear generational difference between the folk who do and don't get it on climate change, is that our education systems have changed in the last 30 years. And a lot of kids now are growing up with a clear understanding of what it means to be responsible about the environment or not, which the judges that I train never got in school. Different generation, right? So I'm just wondering if we can get law schools involved, and frankly, they're not always the cutting edge, if you know what I mean, on new issues. Then how about communication schools? Because it seems to me that that's the other really big piece. And you guys are kind of like the pioneers. But is there a way to sort of get this into the curriculum of everybody who's studying not just journalism, but even just marketing, so that it becomes part of it? And I'm not talking about, using slightly greener film for our cameras. I'm talking about actually communicating a message that is responsible, especially in climate change. I'd really love to hear your thoughts about that, because that's millions of qualified people who are shaping the way an entire generation thinks. Just a question.
Thank you for that. That's great. Well, I can start just very timely response. I just had a coffee with a Yale law student today. She was asking, what can we do to make, can you come to campus? We'd like to create this movement at Yale. And I think the interest was there in the curriculum. And so that's very much something we'd like to continue. But I don't know if anybody else on the panel wants to talk. Tom?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. I think that's a fantastic question. And just to recap, I'm Tom from the Put a Price on It campaign. And one of the best parts about our campaign is we don't come in with a specific prescription as far as how students should organize. Instead, we find where their interests are and kind of run with it. So for example, we have a communications student at American University who just wants to write reports on strategic communication around talking about carbon pricing. We have students who have been very interested from schools of public health who want to get involved. I think law is obviously a very important aspect of that. And I think you can come from the top down and talk from administration level or presidents or people who are writing curriculum, or what we plan on doing is getting students involved, and maybe they're writing a thesis, or they're presenting it to their president, or they're bringing this up and saying, hey, we care about this is something important. So from the student level and the grassroots level, I think you could see that being implemented. And just one more positive note, I'm an undergraduate at Mona College, and the reason why I got involved in this is because I heard about it in 3 separate classes that were unrelated. So it's good to hear that carbon pricing is coming up consistently.
Great. Any other questions? Please.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yes. My name is Po Yuling. I did research on studying the impact of carbon prices on ecosystem services trade-off. One of my finding, or after years of research, is that I find that adding carbon price, it makes some things that to be uncertain. For example, the wood product price or something. If people introduce a carbon price, which is, I don't know what that is, and with different interest rate, that may also affect the pricing of other commodities. And I think that is something uncertain. So I think my question is that carbon price and interest rate and all stuff like that is so new, and it is so there is so many unknown and uncertainty. So I think a government or something like a bigger entity has to be involved. So with the incoming administration, do you think it's something that is pessimistic to look at or optimistic to look at? Yeah, thank you.
Any takers on that one?
Well, let me say a couple of things. So we're in the midst of this amazing clean energy revolution, and the price of solar has come down, 99% since the late 70s and 80% since 2008, and the price of wind has come down tremendously, and the price of batteries have come down, and the price of electric cars, LED lights. So this revolution, it's actually two revolutions, or three. There's the energy efficiency revolution, which no one is talking about, but is sweeping the country because of state action and sweeping the world because of individual country action. And then we have the renewable revolution, and then this battery storage and electric vehicle revolution, which is just starting. So the next 5 to 10 years, we're just going to see an amazing transformation, which is sort of a combination of the Industrial Revolution and the IT revolution. And so, this is the hopeful news about what is happening now. In order to avert catastrophic warming, because we've dawdled for 25 years or more, the scientists making ever more dire warnings, we were kind of run out of time. So we need the carbon price to frankly accelerate and get an orderly transition off of the dirty, climate destroying fuels. The question of who needs to adopt a carbon price and how big it is going to be different for a lot of players. I think obviously in this country, the way things are going, it's going to be exceedingly difficult to have a national carbon price. Now, it is certainly the case that individual states understand the stakes, such as California, and other states understand what the future is. I mean, the future is clean energy, and the jobs of the future, or even of the present, are being created in the clean energy industry, in the country or the state that is the leader in those is going to, be an exporter and a job creator rather than an importer of technologies. So, there's just going to be increasing pressure for more and more players to join. I think, unfortunately, the U.S. federal government may be among the last, but there's no question that most countries in the world are contemplating or embracing some sort of carbon price, including China, which itself is putting in place a pricing system. So, it is going to be complicated. In an ideal world, there would be one uniform price or one uniform trading system, and but until then, it's frankly incumbent on every individual actor. Companies can adopt a carbon price, whereby they act as if carbon had a price in all of their major infrastructure decisions. Cities, states, everyone else can act that way. From my perspective, the good news is the clean energy revolution is inevitable. The thing that is a big question mark is the whole transition going to happen fast enough, and the transition off of fossil fuels going to happen fast enough to avoid, this 1,000 years of climate crisis.
I think the point you make is a really excellent one, and I think is something that we at the bank are very mindful about. We're very aware that our mission of eradicating poverty, creating shared prosperity, we need to address climate change, but we also need to make sure we have a system-wide approach. So what are we going to do to put the social safety nets in place that mean that the poorest and the most vulnerable aren't affected by these fiscal shifts that are coming as a result of things like carbon pricing. But also, many of you will have read the Unbreakables report that we published at Marrakesh, which sort of indicated how the poorest and most vulnerable are affected worst by natural disasters. So, we need a system-wide response. That's why we're doing this at the bank, because we think it's the right thing to do, but it fits with our mission as well. And I think, a final point, I'd really like to thank Tom and Kaia for the leadership that they bring around this, and I think it's very inspiring to hear young people talk the way the two of you do. So thank you very much for the great work that you're doing, and please do continue it. And also, thanks to Joe. Joe and I have had many of these conversations. We live in the same apartment block, so it's great to be on a panel with you, Joe, and talk about these things with an audience. And Tom, thank you to you at the CPLC for your leadership around much of this. I think we're in a really interesting place because of the momentum that you and your colleagues have brought to putting a price on carbon. And I hope you can all go away feeling inspired and taking this message across to the interactions that we have with politicians, policymakers, businesses, and our fellow citizens who, together we need to build this movement.
Well, James, thank you very much for that, and you've inspired me. I think you guys can all take this message to your neighbors. You can wear your own Put a Price on Carbon t-shirt. We have one for each of you. My family's here with me tonight, and they know I wear my t-shirts too much around the house. But we want you to use these when you're mowing your lawn, when you're jogging, when you're shopping at your local store, and then you can start a conversation about why we should put a price on carbon. So congratulations. Let's get a photo.